What happens when Hollywood's hottest young star walks into the lion's den of daytime television and refuses to back down? When Sydney Sweeney stepped onto the View set, no one expected a conversation about her controversial American Eagle campaign to explode into television history. What began as a routine promotional appearance quickly turned into one of the most shocking confrontations the show had ever seen. By the end, security was called, and one person was forcibly removed from the studio. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below telling me which side you think was right in this explosive showdown. The tension was palpable from the moment Sydney walked onto the set. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a crisp white blazer that seemed almost symbolic given the controversy surrounding her latest advertisement. The audience applauded politely, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation. Everyone knew this wouldn't be just another celebrity fluff interview. Joy Behar, seated in her usual spot at the table, had that familiar look in her eyes, the one longtime viewers recognized as a sign she was ready for battle. Her notes were spread out in front of her, far more detailed than usual for what was supposed to be a simple discussion about Sydney's upcoming projects. "Welcome back to The View, everyone," Whoopi Goldberg said, her voice carrying its customary authority. "We're here with Sydney Sweeney, star of Euphoria, The White Lotus, and now, apparently, the center of quite the advertising storm. Sydney, thanks for being here." Sydney smiled graciously, settling into her chair with the ease of someone who had done hundreds of interviews. "Thanks for having me, Whoopi. Always a pleasure to be here." But Joy wasn't interested in pleasantries. She leaned forward slightly, her voice sharpening into the edge that had become her trademark over the years. "Sydney, let's talk about this American Eagle campaign. You had to know that tagline about your great genes was going to cause problems. In today's climate, with everything we know about the history of eugenics in this country, how could you not see the implications?" The audience fell silent. This was happening much faster than anyone expected. Sydney's smile didn't falter, but her posture shifted subtly as she straightened her spine, signaling she wasn't going to back down. "Joy, with all due respect, I think you're reading far too much into what was clearly a play on words," Sydney replied calmly but firmly. "It's a jeans commercial. The creative team thought it was clever wordplay. To suggest there's some hidden eugenics message is frankly ridiculous." Joy's eyebrows shot up. "Ridiculous? Sydney, do you understand the history of genetic superiority arguments in this country? Do you understand what it means when a blonde, blue-eyed actress is being celebrated for her good genes?" "I understand history just fine, Joy," Sydney shot back, steel now evident in her voice. "But I also understand the difference between a clothing advertisement and Nazi propaganda. And frankly, I'm surprised that someone of your intelligence would conflate the two." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop. Whoopi glanced between them like a referee, debating when to step in. Sunny Hostin shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but Joy was just getting started. "My intelligence," Joy's voice rose. "My intelligence tells me that in 2025, we should be more careful about the messages we send, especially when they involve celebrating whiteness and conventional beauty standards at a time when this country is struggling with racial equity." Sydney leaned forward, matching Joy's intensity. "And my intelligence tells me that you're manufacturing outrage where none should exist. This is exactly the kind of performative activism that's dividing this country. You're taking an innocent advertisement and turning it into a grand conspiracy theory." "Performative activism," Joy snapped. "Excuse me, young lady, but I've been fighting for civil rights since before you were born. Don't you dare lecture me about what is and isn't activism." The audience was completely silent now, sensing this had gone far beyond typical daytime television fare. Cameras captured every micro-expression, every slight movement. This was raw, unfiltered conflict unfolding in real time. "And I've been working in an industry that scrutinizes every word, every image, every choice I make since I was a teenager," Sydney said, her composure barely holding. "I know what real discrimination looks like, and this isn't it. This is you creating a problem where none exists because it fits your narrative." Joy slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing through the studio. My narrative is that words matter, imagery matters, and when you put yourself out there as the poster child for genetic superiority, you bear responsibility for that message." "Genetic superiority," Sydney repeated incredulously, her media training finally cracking. "Are you listening to yourself? It's a jeans commercial. Joy, I'm not running for office on a platform of racial purity. I'm selling denim." The irony wasn't lost on anyone that Sydney was wearing American Eagle jeans at that very moment, whether intentional or not. Joy refused to back down. "You can minimize it all you want, but that doesn't change the impact. When young girls see that ad, when they see you being celebrated for your genetics, what message do you think that sends to girls who don't look like you?" Sydney's composure finally snapped. "What message does it send when women like you tear down other women for succeeding? What message does it send when you constantly look for offense, for division, for ways to make people feel guilty just for existing in their own skin?" The studio erupted not in applause, but in shocked murmurs and gasps. Arguments were common on The View, but this level of personal attack was unprecedented. Joy's face flushed, her voice shaking with anger. How dare you suggest that holding you accountable for your choices is tearing you down? How dare you turn this around and make yourself the victim when you're the one who chose to participate in advertising that celebrates genetic privilege? Genetic privilege, Sydney said, now standing without consciously deciding to. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about me like I'm some kind of master race propagandist because I did a commercial for a clothing company. This is insanity. Whoopi finally tried to intervene. Ladies, let's take a breath. No, Whoopi, Joy cut her off. This is important. This young woman needs to understand that her platform comes with responsibility. She can't just put whatever message she wants out there without consequences. Sydney whirled on her. My platform. My responsibility? Joy, you have a platform to. You reach millions of people every day, and you're using that platform right now to bully a young woman for doing her job. Where's your responsibility in that? The word hung in the air like smoke. Bully, there was no taking it back. Joy's face went from flushed to pale in an instant. Bully. Joy's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. You think I'm bullying you by asking you to be accountable for your choices. I think you're bullying me by twisting an innocent advertisement into something sinister so you can grandstand about social justice. Sydney replied, just as quietly, her conviction unshaken. And I think you're bullying me by suggesting I'm responsible for every interpretation of creative advertising that I didn't write or conceptualize. The silence that followed was deafening. This was no longer a debate about advertising or social responsibility. It had become something deeply personal and volatile, and everyone in the studio sensed that a line was about to be crossed. Joy's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. When she spoke again, her voice carried decades of frustration and indignation. You want to know what bullying looks like? Sydney, bullying is when people like me had to fight for every opportunity in this business, while people like you walk in and get handed everything because you fit a certain look, a certain image. Bullying is being told we should be grateful for scraps while the Golden Girls get the feast. Sydney's eyes flashed with something dangerous. People like me, people like you, are we really doing this? Joy, are we really going to reduce each other to stereotypes on national television? You reduced yourself to a stereotype the moment you agreed to that campaign. Joy fired back. You literally allowed yourself to be marketed as genetically superior, and now you want to act like the victim when someone calls it out. The other hosts were frozen in their seats. Sunny looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Alyssa Farah Griffin stared wide-eyed at the spectacle unfolding. Even Whoopi, a veteran of countless on-air confrontations, seemed unsure how to proceed. Sydney stepped closer to the table, her voice dropping to a level that made it more menacing than if she had shouted. I never marketed myself as anything other than an actress doing her job. You're the one who decided to attach all this meaning to it. You're the one who chose to see racism and eugenics in a clothing advertisement. That says more about your mindset than it does about mine. Joy shot to her feet, her chair rolling backward. My mindset comes from decades of watching this industry, this country celebrate one type of beauty, one type of person, while everyone else fights for crumbs. My mindset comes from experience you clearly don't have, and wisdom you clearly lack. Wisdom. Sydney laughed, without humor. Is it wisdom to attack someone for their appearance? Is it wisdom to suggest I'm less deserving of opportunities because of how I look? Because that's exactly what you're doing right now. The audience was silent, the tension nearly audible. Cameras kept rolling, capturing what was rapidly becoming one of the most explosive moments in daytime television in years. Joy's voice rose again. Any trace of professional composure gone. I'm saying that with great privilege comes great responsibility, and you're shirking that responsibility by pretending your choices don't have consequences. And I'm saying you're manufacturing consequences that don't exist. Sydney shot back. You're creating division where there should be none. You're turning a simple commercial into a racial battleground because it serves your political agenda. Political agenda. Joy's voice cracked. My agenda is equality. My agenda is making sure young girls of all colors see themselves represented in media, not just blonde, blue-eyed actresses, selling the idea that their genetics make them special. Sydney moved even closer, her voice deadly quiet. And my agenda is doing my job without being lectured by someone who thinks she has the moral authority to police every decision I make. Your version of equality looks a lot like tearing down other women to make yourself feel superior. That was the breaking point. Joy's face twisted with rage as she leaned forward. Superior? You want to talk about superior? You're lecturing me about women, supporting women while participating in advertising that literally celebrates genetic superiority. The irony is unbelievable. The only unbelievable thing, Sydney replied, raising her voice to match Joy's, is that you think you have the right to decide what messages are acceptable for others to convey. Who made you the arbiter of social responsibility? Who gave you the authority to decide what's offensive and what isn't? Joy slammed both hands on the table, the sound echoing through the studio. Experience gave me that authority. Years of fighting for representation, for equality, for the right to be heard in a world that wanted to silence voices like mine. Something You wouldn't understand because you've never had to fight for anything. Sydney's composure finally shattered. Never had to fight for anything? Are you serious? Do you have any idea what it's like to have every aspect of your appearance, your talent, your worth dissected by people like you? To be told you're only successful because of how you look, not because of your work, your dedication, your skill. Boo-hoo, Joy sneered. Poor little Sydney, criticized for participating in problematic advertising. Meanwhile, women of color can't even get cast in major roles, but sure, you're the real victim. The sarcasm was a mistake. Sydney's eyes burned with fury, and when she spoke, her voice carried a venom that stunned the room. You know what, Joy? You're right. I am blonde. I am conventionally attractive by Hollywood standards. And yes, that probably opened doors. But I work 16-hour days. I study every script until I know it, inside out. I do my own stunts. I try to bring something real to every character I play. And none of that matters to you, does it? All you see is the package, not the person inside it. Joy didn't back down. The package is exactly the problem when it's used to sell the idea that some people are genetically better than others. No one is selling that idea except you, Sydney snapped. You took a play on words about genes and turned it into genetic superiority. You created this controversy out of thin air because you needed something to be outraged about today. I didn't create anything, Joy shouted. The implications were always there. The history is there. The problematic nature of celebrating whiteness is there. Just because you ignore it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Sydney stepped back, fists clenched. And just because you see problems everywhere doesn't mean they're real. Sometimes a commercial is just a commercial. Sometimes a joke is just a joke. Sometimes people can exist without everything they do being filtered through your lens of perpetual grievance. Perpetual grievance. Joy's voice reached a pitch that made audience members flinch. Caring about equality isn't perpetual grievance. It's basic human decency, something you clearly lack. That was the final straw. Sydney turned fully toward Joy, her voice slicing through the studio. Basic human decency. You've spent the last 15 minutes attacking me personally, questioning my character, dismissing my work, and suggesting I'm some kind of racist propagandist because I appeared in a clothing advertisement. If you want to talk about decency, maybe start by looking in the mirror. Joy trembled with rage, her voice barely controlled. Don't you dare turn this on me. Don't you dare make yourself the victim when you chose to profit from problematic messaging. I'm not making myself the victim, Sydney replied calmly. I'm pointing out that your version of social justice looks a lot like personal destruction. You're not fighting for equality, Joy. You're fighting to tear down anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable behavior. The silence that followed was suffocating. Joy and Sydney stared at each other across the table, both breathing hard, both clearly past the point of no return. The other hosts remained frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let it reach its inevitable conclusion. Finally, Joy spoke, her voice quiet and final. I think this interview is over, Sydney said, nodding slowly without breaking eye contact. I think you're right, but neither of them moved. They stood locked in a battle of wills that had outgrown the original topic and become something far more primal, far more personal. The studio held its collective breath, waiting to see who would blink first, who would walk away, who would end a confrontation that had already gone further than anyone thought possible. The stalemate lasted exactly 14 seconds. 14 seconds of two powerful women staring each other down, while an entire television studio held its breath. Then Joy made a decision that would end her career on The View. You know what, Sydney? Joy said, her voice turning cold and calculated, somehow more frightening than her earlier shouting. I've had enough of entitled little princesses like you, thinking you can waltz into any space and expect everyone to bow down to your privilege. Sydney's eyebrows shot up. Entitled little princesses. Joy, you're on national television calling a guest names because she disagreed with you. Who exactly is acting entitled here? I'm acting like someone who's tired of watching this country slide backward, while people like you profit from it. Joy replied, moving around the table and closing the distance between them. I'm acting like someone who remembers when we actually fought for progress instead of just posing for magazine covers. Whoopi finally found her voice. Joy, I think we need to take a commercial break. But Joy ignored her completely, her focus locked on Sydney. You want to know what your problem is? Joy continued. You've never had to struggle for anything real in your life. You've never had to prove you belonged anywhere. You just showed up looking the right way, and everyone handed you everything. Sydney's calm facade cracked again. You don't know anything about my life, Joy. You don't know what I've sacrificed, what I've worked for, what I've overcome. You're making assumptions based on nothing but your own prejudices. Prejudices. Joy laughed bitterly. That's rich, coming from someone who literally profits from genetic prejudice. There it is again, Sydney said, shaking her head in disbelief. The genetic prejudice conspiracy theory. Joy, listen to yourself. You're so desperate to be offended that you're inventing racism where none exists. Joy stepped closer, now within arm's reach of Sydney. I don't need to invent racism, sweetheart. It's been here all along. You're just too privileged to see it. The condescension in Joy's voice when she said sweetheart was unmistakable, and it hit Sydney like a physical blow. Her composure, already hanging by a thread, finally snapped completely. "Don't you dare condescend to me," Sydney said, her voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare stand there and lecture me about privilege, while you use your platform to bully guests who don't agree with your worldview." Bully Joy stepped even closer, her voice rising again. "You keep using that word. I don't think you know what it means." "I know exactly what it means," Sydney shot back, not backing down an inch. "It means using your power to intimidate someone weaker than you. It means ganging up on someone who can't fight back on equal terms. It means exactly what you're doing right now." Joy's face was inches from Sydney's now, both women vibrating with barely contained fury. "If you think I'm bullying you, little girl, then you have no idea what real bullying looks like. Little girl." Sydney's voice sharpened. "Did you just call me little girl?" The studio was so silent you could hear the cameras humming. Everyone in that room knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. Something that would end careers and change lives. Joy's response was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly through the studio. If the shoe fits, that was it. Sydney stepped forward until they were face to face, her voice cutting like glass. "The only thing that fits here, Joy, is your reputation as a bitter old woman who can't stand to see younger women succeed." The gasp from the audience was audible. Calling Joy Behar a bitter old woman on live television crossed every possible line, and everyone knew it. Joy's reaction was immediate and volcanic. "How dare you? How dare you come into my house and disrespect me like that? Your house." Sydney laughed, but it was harsh and ugly. "This isn't your house, Joy. This is a television studio where you're supposed to be a professional. But instead, you're acting like a jealous teenager who can't handle anyone getting attention that isn't you." Joy raised her hand, and for a terrifying moment, it looked like she might actually strike Sydney. The gesture sent shockwaves through the studio, and finally security began moving. "That's enough." Whoopi's voice boomed through the studio with an authority that commanded attention. "Security, please escort Miss Sweeney from the building." Sydney spun around, her face a mask of disbelief. "Excuse me, you're kicking me out. She's the one who just tried to hit me." "I said, that's enough," Whoopi repeated, her voice brooking no argument. "This interview is over." Two security guards approached Sydney, their expressions professional but firm. Sydney looked around the studio, taking in the shocked faces of the audience, the frozen expressions of the other hosts, and finally, Joy's triumphant smirk. "This is unbelievable," Sydney said, her voice carrying clearly as security flanked her. "I come here to do a promotional interview, and I get ambushed by someone who thinks disagreeing with her worldview is a crime." "Got exactly what you deserved," Joy called out, unable to resist one final shot. Sydney stopped walking and turned back toward the table, her voice ringing with conviction. "You know what I got, Joy? I got a perfect demonstration of everything that's wrong with cancel culture. I got to see firsthand how someone can twist an innocent advertisement into a weapon and then use that weapon to destroy someone's reputation." The security guards gently but firmly took Sydney by the arms, guiding her toward the exit, but Sydney wasn't finished. "And you know what else I got?" she called out, her voice carrying over the stunned silence. "I got to show everyone watching exactly what happens when you refuse to apologize for things you didn't do wrong, when you refuse to bow down to the mob, when you stand up for yourself instead of letting bullies tear you down." Joy started to respond, but Whoopi cut her off with a sharp gesture. The cameras continued rolling as Sydney was led away, her head held high, her dignity intact despite the circumstances. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whoopi said, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining professional composure, "we're going to take a commercial break." But as the red recording lights dimmed, everyone in that studio knew what they had witnessed would be dissected, analyzed, and debated for months to come. The confrontation between Sydney Sweeney and Joy Behar had become more than a television argument. It had become a cultural moment, a line in the sand, a perfect encapsulation of the divisions tearing at the fabric of American discourse. Sydney walked out of the studio with her head held high, escorted by security, unbroken by the experience. She had come to promote her work, and instead found herself in a battle for her reputation, her character, and her right to exist in the public sphere without constantly apologizing for who she was. Joy remained at the table, still trembling with residual anger, still convinced she had been fighting the good fight, still believing her actions had been justified by the righteousness of her cause. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the truth lay buried under layers of assumption, interpretation, and ideological warfare, waiting for someone brave enough to dig it out and examine it in the cold light of day. What do you think? Was Sydney right to stand her ground against what she saw as bullying and manufactured outrage? Or was Joy justified in holding her accountable for participating in what she viewed as problematic messaging? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more explosive celebrity confrontations and behind-the-scenes drama the mainstream media won't show you.